The wind that swept through the pass of Thermopylae carried the smell of death. It had been 1 year since King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans made their final stand against the endless tide of Xerxes' army. 1 year since the hot gates ran red with blood, Greek and Persian alike. 1 year since the bravest men Sparta had ever produced were reduced to bones bleaching under the Aegean sun. But Sparta does not forget, and Sparta does not forgive. In the city of Lacedaemon, there was no wailing, no public mourning. Spartan women did not weep for their fallen sons and husbands. They sharpened their silence into something far more dangerous. They raised their surviving children with stories of glory, of sacrifice, of a debt written in blood that Persia would one day pay. Before we continue this journey into one of ancient history's most brutal acts of vengeance, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and if this is your first time on our channel, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is a story of how grief became fury, and fury became massacre. Among those who survived the aftermath of Thermopylae was a man named Aristodemus. He was one of only 2 Spartans who had not died at the hot gates. Illness had forced him to retreat before the final battle. When he returned to Sparta, he found no welcome. Women turned their faces from him in the streets. Children threw stones. His own mother refused to speak his name. They called him Aristodemus the coward. He lived in disgrace, a ghost among the living, his shame heavier than any Persian blade could ever be. Every morning he woke to the same thought: he should have died with his brothers. Every night he dreamed of Leonidas's final moments. The king standing tall as arrows darkened the sky, his voice steady as he commanded his men to fight to the last breath. But Aristodemus had not been there, and that absence carved a wound in his soul that no amount of time could heal. Yet even as Aristodemus wallowed in his private hell, the gears of war were turning once more. Xerxes had retreated to Persia after his navy was shattered at Salamis, but he left behind his finest general, Mardonio, with an army of 300,000 men. The Persian occupation of Greece was not over. Athens lay in ruins, its temples burned, its people scattered. The Greeks needed to unite once more, and this time Sparta would lead not 300 warriors, but 10,000. Word came to Sparta in the spring of 479 BC. The allied Greek cities were gathering at the Isthmus of Corinth. The Athenians, the Corinthians, the Megarians, all of them looked to Sparta for leadership. They remembered what the 300 had done. They knew that Spartan steel was the only thing Persia truly feared. The Ephors, the 5 rulers who governed Sparta, convened in the dim halls of the Gerousia. The debate was fierce. Some argued that Sparta should fortify the Peloponnese and let the northern cities burn. Why risk more Spartan lives for Athenians who had mocked their customs? But one voice cut through the argument like a blade: Pausanias. He was the nephew of Leonidas, a young regent who had inherited command of the Spartan army after the king's death. He stood before the council, his crimson cloak draped over shoulders that had never known defeat, his eyes burning with something beyond ambition. "My uncle died to give Greece time," Pausanias said, his voice low but unyielding. "He did not die so we could hide behind walls, while Persia devours everything he bled to protect. The 300 bought us a year. Now we must collect the debt." The Ephors exchanged glances. The weight of Leonidas' legacy hung over them all. Finally, the eldest among them spoke. "Then march, Pausanias, march, and show Persia what happens when you kill a Spartan king." The road north from Sparta wound through the rugged hills of Laconia, past olive groves and vineyards, past villages where women watched in silence as the army marched by. 10,000 Spartans, 5,000 perioikoi, the free non-citizens who fought alongside them, 35,000 helots carrying supplies, shields, and the grim determination of men who knew they might never return. Pausanias rode at the head of the column, his bronze cuirass gleaming under the spring sun. Beside him walked the youngest warriors, the ones who had been boys when Thermopylae fell. They had grown up on stories of the 300. They had trained with wooden swords, imagining themselves standing where Leonidas stood. Now they would have their chance. Among them was a young hoplite named Callicrates. At 22, he was considered the most beautiful man in the Spartan army, a distinction that meant nothing on the battlefield but everything in the songs that would be sung afterward. Callicrates did not care about beauty. He cared about one thing only: killing Persians. His father had been one of the 300. "I was 12 when they marched out," Callicrates told his companions as they walked. "My father ruffled my hair and told me to grow strong. He said he would bring me a Persian helmet as a trophy." He paused, his jaw tightening. He never came back. No helmet, no body, just a message that he died well. The other warriors nodded. Many of them had similar stories. Brothers, uncles, fathers, all swallowed by the hot gates. "At Plataea," one of them said, "we will collect enough helmets for every family in Sparta." The army reached the Isthmus of Corinth in early summer. There, they found the largest Greek force ever assembled, over 100,000 men from more than 30 city-states. Athenians who had watched their city burn, Corinthians who had lost ships at Salamis, Tegeans who remembered Persian cavalry trampling their fields. They all looked to the Spartans. Pausanias held council with the other generals that night. The Athenian commander, Aristides, called the Just for his reputation of fairness, clasped arms with the Spartan regent. "We have waited a year for this," Aristides said. "My people are living in tents on Salamis. Our temples are ash. We want blood." "You will have it," Pausanias replied, "but we must be patient. Mardonio wants us to attack him on open ground where his cavalry can slaughter us. We will not give him that satisfaction." The Greek strategy was simple: draw the Persians south, away from their supply lines, and force them to fight on terrain that favored hoplite warfare. The rolling hills and narrow valleys of Boeotia would neutralize the Persian cavalry advantage, but Mardonio was no fool. He had studied Greek tactics. He knew that Spartans were invincible in a head-on phalanx clash, so he would not give them one. The game of cat and mouse had begun. The Greeks advanced into Boeotia in late summer, their bronze shields flashing like a river of fire under the August sun. Mardonio watched them from his position near the city of Thebes. The Thebans, traitors who had sided with Persia, provided him with intelligence, supplies, and local knowledge. They told him the Greeks were divided, quarrelsome, held together only by hatred and the memory of Thermopylae. "Let them come," Mardonio told his officers. "Their unity will crumble when they see the size of our army." And it was a sight to break men's hearts. 300,000 soldiers stretched across the plain of the Asopus River. Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Indians, Ethiopians, Egyptians, cavalry units numbering in the tens of thousands, archers who could darken the sky with arrows. The immortals, the elite 10,000 who had fought at Thermopylae, stood in gleaming formation, their wicker shields painted with golden lions. Against this tide stood the Greeks, 110,000 men, most of them citizen soldiers who had left farms and workshops to fight. Pausanias established his position on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, where the terrain protected his flanks. For 11 days, the two armies stared at each other across the plain, neither willing to make the first move. The Persian cavalry harassed the Greek supply lines. They poisoned the springs. They shot arrows into the camp at night. Men began to grumble. The Athenians accused the Spartans of cowardice. The Spartans accused the Athenians of impatience. Aristodemus, the coward, watched all of this with burning eyes. He had been allowed to march with the army, but he was given no position of honor. He carried his shield at the back of the formation, among the helots and supply carriers. The other Spartans would not speak to him. Even in the face of the enemy, his shame followed him like a shadow. But Aristodemus had made a decision. At Plataea, he would redeem himself, or he would die trying. There was no third option. On the 12th night, Pausanias received word that a massive Persian cavalry force was moving to cut off their water supply completely. The Greeks would have to retreat or attack. He chose to retreat, but only to better ground. The order went out. Under cover of darkness, the Greek army would withdraw to a new position near the town of Plataea itself. There, they would have access to fresh water and more defensible terrain. But in the chaos of the night march, everything went wrong. Moving 100,000 men in darkness is like trying to herd cats through a thunderstorm. Units got separated, commanders lost contact with each other. The Corinthians marched too far west. The Megarians stumbled into a ravine. By dawn, the Greek army was scattered across 3 miles of broken terrain, exactly the situation Pausanias had tried to avoid. And Mardonio saw his opportunity. As the sun rose over the Asopus plain, Persian scouts reported the Greek disarray. The general smiled for the first time in weeks. "The gods have delivered them to us," he said. "Attack now, while they are divided." The Persian cavalry thundered forward, followed by wave after wave of infantry. Their target, the isolated Spartan contingent, which had been separated from the rest of the Greek army during the night march. Pausanias found himself with only 11,500 men, the Spartans and Tegeans, facing the full might of the Persian army. He sent desperate messages to the Athenians. "Come quickly, we are about to be overwhelmed." But the Athenians were engaged with the Thebans and their Greek collaborators. They could not break away. The Spartans were alone. Pausanias did what any Spartan commander would do. He ordered his men into phalanx formation and prepared to hold. The Persian arrows came first, thousands of them blotting out the morning sun. The Spartans raised their heavy bronze shields and crouched behind them, the arrows clattering like hail on a tin roof. Men fell, but the line held. Then came the cavalry charges. Wave after wave of Persian horsemen crashed against the Spartan shields, their javelins and short swords seeking any gap in the formation. The Tegeans on the flank wavered, nearly broke, but the Spartans beside them held firm. "Stand!" Pausanias roared. "Stand, sons of Heracles! Remember Thermopylae!" But even Spartans cannot hold forever against endless numbers. The Persians sensed victory. They pressed harder. And then something changed. Pausanias looked to the sky and began to pray. He called upon the gods, Zeus, Athena, Hera, to send a sign, to give his men the strength to endure. The sacrifice was made. The omens were read. Finally, the priests declared the signs were favorable. Pausanias lowered his spear, fixed his eyes on the Persian line, and gave the order that would echo through history. "Spartans, advance!" What happened next was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Spartan phalanx moved forward like a machine of bronze and flesh, their spears leveled, their shields locked. The Persians had never faced anything like it at close quarters, and they never would again. The first rank of immortals crumpled like parchment before a flame. Their wicker shields, designed to stop arrows, splintered against Spartan iron. Their short spears could not reach past the wall of Greek shields. They stabbed and slashed at air, while Spartan points found throats, eyes, groins. Aristodemus was in the front rank. He had pushed his way forward during the night, ignoring the insults of his comrades. When the advance began, he was among the first to charge. He fought like a man possessed, no, like a man who had already died and had nothing left to lose. His spear shattered in the chest of a Persian officer. He drew his short sword and kept killing. Blood painted his face, his arms, his crimson cloak. He did not feel the wounds he was taking. He felt only the release of a year's worth of shame pouring out of him with every Persian life he claimed. "Aristodemus!" a Spartan beside him shouted. "Fall back! You are too far ahead!" But Aristodemus did not hear. He had broken formation, charging deep into the Persian ranks alone. It was glorious. It was suicidal. It was exactly what he wanted. Pausanias saw him and cursed. Breaking formation was the one unforgivable sin in Spartan warfare. The phalanx worked because every man protected the man beside him. A warrior who charged ahead was not brave. He was selfish, endangering his brothers for personal glory. But there was no time to stop him now. The battle had become a churning chaos of bronze and blood. Mardonio himself rode into the fight, trying to rally his immortals. He was a brave man, perhaps the bravest in the Persian army, and he knew that if the center broke, everything was lost. "Hold!" he screamed. "Hold for the King of Kings!" But his men were dying by the hundreds. The Spartans advanced step by bloody step, their formation tightening even as bodies piled around them. Callicrates, the beautiful young warrior, fell early in the fighting, struck by an arrow before he could wet his blade with Persian blood. His companions dragged him behind the line, but there was nothing to be done. He died with a smile on his face. "Tell them I fell facing the enemy," he whispered. "Tell them I did not disgrace Sparta." It was all any of them wanted. The Persian general made his last stand, surrounded by 1,000 of his best men. Mardonio fought on horseback, his sword flashing as he cut down any Greek who came near. He had served Xerxes for 20 years. He had conquered nations. He had never known defeat, but he had never faced Spartans in close combat. A group of Tegeans reached him first, allied warriors who had fought beside Sparta since the days of their grandfathers. They swarmed his horse, dragging him from the saddle. Mardonio killed 3 of them before a Spartan spear found his side. He fell into the dust, still fighting, still screaming orders to men who could no longer hear him. The Spartan who finished him was named Aemnestus, a name that would be forgotten by history, overshadowed by kings and generals. But in that moment, as his blade opened Mardonio's throat, he changed the world. The Persian command structure collapsed instantly. Without Mardonio, there was no one to coordinate the vast army. The Immortals broke first, then the Medes, then the Bactrians. What had been an organized force became a stampede of terrified men fleeing toward their fortified camp. The Greeks pursued. Pausanias let them run. He knew what was coming next. "To their camp!" he ordered. "No quarter!" The Persian camp was a marvel of Eastern engineering. Wooden walls, towers, trenches filled with stakes. It held the treasures of 100 conquered nations: gold, silver, silk, spices. It held the concubines and servants who traveled with the army. It held the supplies that were supposed to feed the occupation of Greece for years. It would hold nothing by nightfall. The Spartans reached the Persian fortifications just as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains. The camp was chaos. Soldiers streamed through the gates, fighting each other to get inside. Officers screamed contradictory orders. The wounded were trampled by the living. The treasure wagons became obstacles as men tried to flee with whatever they could carry. The Greeks hit the walls like a tidal wave. The Tegeans breached the defenses first, hacking through the wooden palisade with axes. The Athenians, fresh from destroying the Theban traitors, arrived just in time to pour through the gap. What followed was not warfare, it was extermination. The Persians tried to surrender. They threw down their weapons, raised their hands, begged in a dozen languages for mercy. But the Greeks remembered Athens burning. They remembered Thermopylae. They remembered a year of Persian cavalry raids and poisoned wells. There would be no mercy. Aristodemus was still fighting. He had taken wounds that would have killed any normal man: a gash across his scalp, a Persian arrow through his thigh, countless cuts and bruises. But he kept moving, kept killing, driven by something beyond pain or exhaustion. He found a group of immortals making a last stand near Mardonio's tent. They had formed a tight circle, their remaining shields locked, determined to die with honor. Aristodemus charged them alone. The Immortals cut him down in seconds. But as he fell, he took 2 of them with him, his sword buried in one man's neck, his dying hand crushing another's throat. He died smiling. When the other Spartans found his body the next morning, they debated whether to honor him. He had redeemed himself with his courage, but he had also broken formation, fighting for personal glory rather than the good of the phalanx. In the end, they decided Aristodemus would not be called a coward anymore, but neither would he be called a hero. His name would be spoken with respect, nothing more. It was enough. Dawn broke over a field of corpses. The Persian army, 300,000 strong when the sun rose the previous day, had ceased to exist. Historians would later estimate that over 100,000 Persians died at Plataea and in the rout that followed. Some accounts claimed 200,000. The true number would never be known. The Greeks lost fewer than 2,000 men. It was the most lopsided victory in ancient history, a massacre so complete that it would take Persia generations to recover. Pausanias walked through the Persian camp in silence, stepping over bodies, his crimson cloak now black with dried blood. He had not slept in 2 days, he had not eaten in 1, but he needed to see this. The tent of Mardonio was a palace of silk and gold. Tapestries worth a king's ransom hung from bronze poles. Persian carpets cushioned floors that had never known Greek feet. Servants cowered in corners, waiting to learn if they would live or die. Pausanias ordered them spared. He was many things, but he was not cruel to the helpless. He found Mardonio's body near the entrance, stripped of armor by looters. The great general looked smaller in death, just another corpse on a field of thousands. "Have him buried with honors," Pausanias said. "He was a brave man. He deserves that much." His officers obeyed, though some grumbled. Spartans did not usually honor their enemies, but Pausanias understood something his men did not. True victory required magnanimity. The world was watching. How Greece treated its defeated foes would shape its reputation for centuries. The treasure was divided according to ancient custom. 1/10 went to the gods, golden tripods dedicated at Delphi, offerings burned at a dozen temples. The rest was split among the allied cities, with Sparta and Athens taking the largest shares. The Helots collected Persian weapons for days, mountains of swords, shields, spears, and arrows, enough to arm Greece for a generation. The golden throne of Xerxes, left behind when the King of Kings fled after Salamis, was sent to Athens as a trophy. But the Spartans wanted only one thing. Before returning home, Pausanias led a detachment of Spartans back to the hot gates. It had been a year since Leonidas fell. The pass had been cleared of bodies by the Persians. They had no use for Greek bones cluttering their supply route. But the Greeks knew where to look. They found the burial mound near the middle gate, where the final stand had taken place. Persian soldiers had thrown the Greek dead into a mass grave, covering them with stones and dirt. It was meant as an insult, denying them proper funeral rites. The Spartans dug. For 3 days they excavated the mound with their bare hands, pulling out bones and fragments of armor. They could not identify individual warriors. The bodies had been stripped and mixed together, but that did not matter. These were their brothers, their fathers, their king. Pausanias stood at the edge of the pit as the last bones were removed. The sun was setting over the pass, painting the cliffs in shades of red and gold, the same cliffs that had witnessed the most famous last stand in history. "Uncle," he said quietly, though no one could hear him, "we have avenged you. Persia will never threaten Greece again. Your sacrifice was not in vain." The bones were reburied with full honors. A stone lion was erected to mark the spot, a monument that would stand for 2,000 years until earthquakes and time finally brought it down. An inscription was carved beneath it. "Go, stranger, and tell the Spartans that here we lie, obedient to their commands." The words had been written a year earlier, just after the battle, but now they carried new meaning. The 300 had held the gates long enough for Greece to rally, and Greece had answered. The debt was paid. The Battle of Plataea ended the Persian invasion of Greece forever. Xerxes would spend the rest of his reign dealing with rebellions and court intrigues. His dream of Western conquest shattered. He was assassinated 15 years later by his own bodyguard, dying in his bed, a far less glorious end than Leonidas or Mardonio. The Greeks emerged from the Persian wars as the dominant power of the Mediterranean. Athens would use the peace to build an empire, creating the golden age of Pericles. the age of democracy, philosophy, drama, and art that would shape Western civilization for millennia. Sparta would retreat into its traditional isolation, suspicious of Athenian ambition. The two allies would become rivals, then enemies, eventually destroying each other in the Peloponnesian War. But that tragedy lay decades in the future. For now, there was only victory. Pausanias returned to Sparta, a hero. He would later fall from grace, accused of conspiring with Persia. An ironic end for the man who destroyed Persian power. He died trapped in a temple, starved to death by his own people. History is rarely kind to its greatest warriors. The survivors of Plataea grew old, telling stories to their grandchildren. They spoke of the dust and blood, the screaming horses, the moment when the Persian line finally broke. They spoke of Callicrates, the beautiful warrior who died with a smile. They spoke of Aristodemus, the coward who redeemed himself in death, and they spoke of Thermopylae, because that was where everything began. 300 men who knew they were going to die, choosing to stand anyway. Their sacrifice had seemed meaningless at the time, a gesture of defiance against an unstoppable tide. But gestures matter. The 300 showed Greece that Persia could be resisted. They bought time for the fleet to prepare, for the allies to gather, for the spirit of resistance to spread. Without Thermopylae, there would have been no Salamis. Without Salamis, there would have been no Plataea. The death of the 300 was not an ending. It was a seed that grew into the massacre at Plataea, where Sparta finally collected its blood debt, where the memory of Leonidas became a war cry that shattered the greatest army the ancient world had ever seen. The Persians learned a lesson that day, one that every empire since has eventually learned. You can kill Spartans, but you cannot kill what Spartans die for. And when you try, their brothers will come for you, not in hundreds, in thousands.